Hello and welcome to the Business Today, India's Best CEO Roundtable with the jury in the 12th edition of one of India's most coveted business recognition awards. And with me, the high-powered panel, the jury that has decided these awards, that you'll not get to know during this show, but it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Uday Kotak, the founder and director of Kotak Mahindra Bank, the chairperson of the jury. We're also joined by Mr. Rajat Dhawan, the senior managing partner at McKinsey Company in India. Ramnath Krishnan, the managing director of ICRA, is also with us. Vishakha, the managing director and CEO of IndiaFirst Life Insurance Company. Amit Tandon, the founder and MD of Institutional Investor Advisor Services. I am Siddharth Zarabi, and with me my colleague Saurav Majumdar. Mr. Kotak, we are at the cusp of what many people say is India's time in its economic history. 2024, and we've seen the run-up. What, according to you, is the best way to describe the macroeconomic situation of India?
India has brilliantly navigated COVID, Russia, Ukraine, challenges on oil for a point of time, inflation, interest rates, and come out very, very well at the other end. We also have demonstrated our global leadership both at G20 and otherwise. India is now on the table across the world. And keeping that in mind, it's really heartening to see this year's GDP growth at 7%. But I do believe our aspiration needs to be much higher. I would look forward to an India aspiring for a sustained 9% GDP growth for the next 25 years, which takes our economy to 30 trillion plus and per capita income from current levels of $2,500 to $15,000 per person.
Are all the building blocks in place?
I think building blocks, many of them are in place. But one of the things I always believe is we must aspire and be ready to challenge ourselves. We should not get into a comfort zone. That is something which I would strongly believe.
Mr. Kotak, recently you were, very eloquent about one point, about concentration of wealth and concentration at the top of the heap in terms of Indian corporations. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, and what do you think is the way out of this?
I'm a believer in letting many flowers bloom. India is a country of entrepreneurs. We are seeing a huge interest in startups. People wanting to do something and create something. The India when I started had an average young Indian less secure and most of the time was looking for opportunity outside India. Today is a different India and we must spread our wings and make many entrepreneurs win.
Rajat Dhawan, the point that Mr. Kotak makes, and we just heard someone else on another Business Today program, and he said, Bahar kya kar rahe ho? Come back to India. This is India's time. And he was calling all the people who head out the brain drain. Is it something that you agree with?
Look, I think we should come back to brain drain, but the template for India in the next 25 years is set. It is going to be India's century where we're going to follow the template of sustainable and inclusive growth. I think each of those three keywords are important. Inclusiveness is super important because beyond that, we need to come out with our own capitalist model where the benefits of capitalism and benefits of businesses and growth and profitability accrue to all sections of society. Job creation will be the fundamental engine to do that, and we think 600 million new jobs will get created in the next 25 years, of which 220 will be non-farm jobs with rising levels of productivity that's needed. Sustainable energy transitions is needed. We have the opportunity to do it first time right. 70-75% of India is still to be built out and we can do it first time right. But the most important enabler in this is growth. Because growth creates all the funding for sustainability and inclusiveness and the GDP per capita that Uday talked about. And coming back to the topic of brain drain, frankly, this is the place where human capital is going to come from. 1 in 5 working age people 20 years from now will be an Indian. Frankly, this is the place where opportunities are, where the human capital is. So if at all we will export human capital, but in a very targeted way, I think the next 20 years, 25 years is a place to be here to really make sustainable, inclusive growth happen.
Amit, let me come to you. The BT 500 rankings have shown resilience
in the wake of global headwinds and a lot of other challenges individual sectors have faced, particularly post-COVID. What is your sense about governance, for instance? Because that's something you keenly follow. Do you think the governance segment, do you think Indian corporations have improved, and what are the things which you would like to see going forward?
So thanks a lot. So one of the things we find is that over the last 12, 14 years since we've started tracking the sector and looking closely at governance, the governance standards have improved. In a large part, they've been driven by regulatory changes, but it's also driven by what investors are pushing. And the third is companies themselves realize that, look, if they're better governed, then there is better valuation, it's easier to do business, they're able to attract much, much more capital. So that is clearly the good news. Is it so across the board? No. There will be periodic blowouts. If you kind of look at the whole entire ecosystem, then I would say the black hole, if I may use that word, is with regard to startups. Those are people who kind of have a universe of their own, and they kind of feel that as long as they have access to private equity and huge amounts of capital, they can kind of look around. But I'm sure, again, with the focus on profitability, as more of them start to look at going into the markets, that, of course, will also start to change. But listed space, I think there is a great improvement. Coming to where we feel the focus needs to be, look, we've got regulations to cover everything. And whenever there is some kind of event which takes place, the solution seems to be have another regulation to get around it, rather than say that those who have kind of failed need to bear the consequences of that. So we need to strengthen the enforcement of a lot of our regulations, and then we are already in the path to compete, and we will be much, much better placed than we are today.
Vishakha, coming to you, and this is something that's well appreciated, that perhaps what we need is better implementation and not newer laws. We have plenty of them. But, we just were discussing at another event who will finance India's growth, the kind of growth that Mr. Kotak talked about. I'll come to him also. But do you think that the capital scenario in terms of funds being available to finance this growth is good enough over the next few years?
I genuinely don't think that capital is the issue at all. As Mr. Kotak rightly said, the kind of entrepreneurship that's available, the capital is not the issue. I think what we really need to see is how well are we going to be able to utilize that capital. I do believe that philanthropy is growing very strongly along with that. So while you may have capital centered with a few people, there is also a willingness to spread that capital on all ventures. You look at the kind of startups that are coming up, you look at the kind of VCs that come up, you look at the way technology is being harnessed in India. And I dare say on anecdotal evidence that the way we are able to use technology to ensure that the per capita income across the country grows, I think is something that very few people are able to do. The stock markets have shown that we are now almost free from FIIs, right? It's all managed by domestic institutional investors. So capital, I don't think that's an issue at all. How well are we able to harness it, deploy it? How well are we able to use and correlate our jugaad with governance, I think is the key to the future.
I'll take a quick question with Mr. Krishnan. Mr. Krishnan, where does corporate India stand today if you were to compare it with 10 or 20 years ago in terms of corporate governance and the way they run their businesses? The point about startups was also made, but I'm talking about the BT 500 kind of companies, really.
Naturally, over the last 2 decades, things have evolved and things have improved, significantly, not only just on the governance front, but also in terms of business practices, resilience, the prudence, discipline, etc., etc. So improved on many, many fronts. And to be fair, naturally the regulators also have been raising the bar consistently, and they will continue to raise the bar, and that's the way it is. And which also ensures that everybody, stays on the straight and narrow. And in the very recent past, post-pandemic, what also has happened is people have actually shifted their attention to conserving liquidity, deleveraging, and so on and so forth. The health of India Inc., if you like, at the present time is in pretty good shape, and that includes banks, NBFCs, and so on and so forth. The asset quality is at the moment pretty decent, and we expect it to be decent at least in the foreseeable future as well. So therefore, I think a lot more robust, a lot more resilient, and certainly on an upward trajectory is what I would say.
Mr. Kotak, my question to you is, which are the sectors in particular which you see powering this, new Indian dream?
I think it's going to be the whole area of infrastructure, which if India has to happen, infrastructure has to happen. Second, I would like to see a strong revival of manufacturing. We have a manufacturing share at a very low rate in the overall GDP. And that's not at the cost of services. We are not saying services is not important. It is very important. It's 60+% of the GDP. But we really need to get our act together on infrastructure and manufacturing. And as a contrarian, looking at the ratio of agriculture to population, we need dramatic strides in that and really increase the productivity of agriculture, because if there are differentiating factors in the world, if we have a disproportionate production of food and agricultural items, we will have negotiating chips around the world. And I'm also a believer that will also be consistent with climate change and sustainability as we go forward.
You wanted to come in, Rajat?
And just adding maybe 2 or 3 other opportunities in addition to 3 that Uday already highlighted. I would say digital consumption and really the penetration of digital services across the enablement zone through all the digital public infra, but also real digital services and goods and services that could be delivered to the masses. I think that is a $1 trillion opportunity in 10 years' time. I think the other one I would call is the real global captive center opportunity, the SaaS opportunity. So basically combine talent along with service provisioning from India and leveraging the talent horsepower of this is another $1 trillion opportunity 10-15 years out. I would just add those 2 to the mix because that would power one other segment of this.
You wanted to come in on the same point?
Yeah, I think the vision of insurance for all by 2047, we underestimate the importance of insurance in reinstating in terms of any calamities. We think of insurance only in terms of dire necessity. Even if you take COVID and if you take not just life insurance, but if you take loss of profits, something that very few people buy, there's an insurance for every calamity that is there. And I think that is a absolute springboard for people to come back. And I think that a permeation of that, which is being anyway done by the government in terms of insurance for all, I think that is going to be a key pillar. You have entrepreneurship, you've got risk, then you've got risk mitigation. A combination of this is absolutely infallible.
Mr. Krishnan, you wanted to come in on the same point?
I mean, I think I think the other panelists have pretty much actually covered all the points, I think, but the transformational piece, as Mr. Kotak said, naturally is going to be spends on infrastructure, urbanization of the infrastructure that we currently have in the urban cities, particularly given the fact that there will be a significant shift of people from the rural cities, towns for that matter, into the urban side. And the other point is naturally a lot of it has to be enabled through technology. To make things, get delivered, quicker to market and in an efficient, manner as well. So all of this is important, but yet, and I think as Mr. Kotak said earlier, 6-7% growth is not going to get us where we want to be. So it has to be consistent growth at the rate of at least about 9.5-10%. And that has to be consistent, that has to happen over time for us to get to the goals, that we have set for ourselves.
Vishakha, I wanted to ask you, 9.5-10% consistent growth. The Prime Minister, Niti Aayog, all of them have been talking about not just growth, but women-led growth. And this has become a very important piece because women consist of half India's population. So, and yet we see a lot of distance remains to be covered despite the steps which have already been taken and the progress made. What do you see as the way forward in terms of enabling women not just to drop off from the workforce, but also to move up the ladder, corporate ladder?
You know, I had, when Mr. Ramnath was making the point of people moving from rural to the cities, I was actually thinking, no, technology is enabling a more equal spread of people across the country. You know, I think if we can leverage technology well enough, there are two things that's going to happen. One is the asymmetry of information disappears. Okay, so the advantage of having information versus not is gone. Second, the location. Okay, so the ability to work from wherever it is convenient increases. So I think these two parameters will decide how women can actually move. Having said which, one of the vicious cycles we are stuck in today is we don't have enough women in leadership. When you don't have enough women in leadership, the policies that are being made do not reflect equitable and inclusive policies. And because you don't have that, you don't have women in leadership. I think we're stuck in that vicious cycle a bit. I think that needs to be broken by very self-aware leaders who are able to step out of their comfort zone way of thinking and bring in people who are able to think differently.
And not just women leaders, men as well.
I'm talking about the men leaders because today the persons in power, the persons who are making decisions are predominantly men. So we need more men to get more self-aware and, you know, minority here, but I think more self-aware and more confident to be able to bring in voices and opinions which are completely contrarian onto the board.
Okay, as we wind down this conversation, one quick comment from you, Mr. Tandon, in terms of the risks that we should be looking out for, because while we all say that 2024 will be hopefully better than 2023, what are the risks that we should keep in mind?
So look, India is known to disappoint both the optimists and the pessimists. So that's something which we need to take into our mind. But I think it's something which Uday referred to, that we can't make the assumption that we are already sitting on the high table and therefore there's nothing to be done, we can cruise along. At each step, you move forward. You have to go back and say, look, what were the underlying drivers? What is it that's working? What is it that is kind of pulling you down? And there start to address it. I think that's the big. There will be, look, all these things happen globally. There are wars, you know, there's the Ukraine conflict, there's what's happening in Israel, there's COVID. All these things will continue to happen. All you have to do is see that how resilient you are, and for that you have to have sufficient processes in place and an awareness that, look, what is it that can drag you down?
Okay. Mr. Kotak, one last word on today's short discussion, and this is, we are looking back, you know, India had a great moment with G20 in terms of projecting the nation and showcasing much of what has been done. There's never been an instance of a G20 presidency taking G20 delegates all across and a vast country like India. Going forward, how do you think we have scored globally as far as brand India is concerned?
I think we are really right there. And I've seen occasions when brand India has done well in the past, but this time it genuinely looks like it's different. And there is an acceptance that India is really out there. But brand India, for it to be sustainable, has to be backed by some solid areas where we need to really focus on. No country in the world is a leader without a disproportionate spend on military and defense. America's power, other countries' power. Therefore, we need to dramatically increase our spend and become truly powerful. At the end of the day, power is power. So we have the heft now, but we need to back it by serious development on defense power. Soft power, I think we are getting. And finally, the size of our country in terms of GDP. We really need to get there and first get into double-digit trillion as soon as we can, from a current 3.7, 3.8 trillion. People worldwide respect power. And power comes from your military strength, or financial strength, and soft power. We made a lot of progress on the soft power. Financial strength is size of the economy. And military is the sheer power of protecting the nation and be counted.
Absolutely. And that, viewers, could be the agenda for 2024 and beyond. And this high-powered jury at Business Today, India's best CEOs panel discussion that we have had has outlined the agenda for 2024 and beyond. Mr. Kotak and the rest of the jury, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.